Praise be Jesus and Mary. In the readings for today's Mass, we are reminded of the importance of prayer in our daily lives. Like the prophet Elijah in the first reading, we can find God, in a certain sense, atop the mountain, that is, in silence, in solitude, and hear him speaking to us, with a tiny whispering sound, in a still, small voice. In the gospel passage, Jesus, too, shows us the importance of prayer, dedicating much of his time to it. And we could say he was always in prayer, of course, but during his public ministry, he set aside time just for that, specifically to give his disciples an example of prayer to follow. In today's world, we Christians cannot do without this lifeline, this anchor, shall we call it, prayer. It's indispensable. Like Peter in today's gospel passage, we will be saved, from being engulfed by the storm-tossed sea of the world, that surrounds us, by prayer, only by prayer, by calling out to God for his mighty and sure help, always available to us. Today's first reading from 1 Kings chapter 19 is one of the most beautiful passages of the Old Testament, for it shows us how God is ever attentive to the needs of his faithful servants, like the prophets of old were, like Elijah. The prophet Elijah was in flight, on this occasion, on flight from the cruel and wicked Queen Jezebel, who sought to kill him. So the prophet took refuge in the best place that he could, on the holy mountain of God, Mount Horeb. And that was where, long ago, Moses received the law from God, and when the covenant between God and his holy people, Israel, was renewed. Having arrived at the mountain, Elijah retreated in a cave, and there he was immersed, we can imagine, in solitude and silence, waiting for the Lord to reveal himself in his plan to him. At a certain point, God did speak to the prophet. He told him, to go out of the cave and wait for him, for he would be coming by in some fashion. And as we heard, first came a strong, heavy wind. It was so strong that it rent the mountains and crushed rocks. But we're told God was not in the heavy wind. And next came the violent earthquake. But here too, we're told God was not in the earthquake. And afterwards, there was a raging fire. But here too, the Lord was not in the fire. And finally, there was the tiny whispering sound, a still small voice, and the prophet Elijah recognized immediately that it was the Lord, present, speaking to him. So the prophet recognized, God's voice because he was already well trained in the art of prayer and contemplation, already being a man accustomed to solitude and silence. But like Elijah, we too are called to cultivate a deep prayer life of contemplation even, to be able to hear God speaking to us, and he does, but in the way that he ordinarily prefers, with a tiny whispering sound, with a still small voice. It's not surprising that our Lord Jesus taught us this lesson, or reinforced, this lesson of prayer and how to pray. He's given us the best example to follow. He's pretty much from the gospel passage and various references to prayer, that it's so important it should be on the top of our list of priorities, as Christians. Something we should dedicate ourselves to. And like a good teacher, and Jesus was the very best of teachers, he practiced what he preached, and not just taught us how to pray and taught us the best prayer, the vocal prayer, the Our Father or the Lord's Prayer, but he himself prayed. As we mentioned earlier, he would dedicate long periods of time, whole nights in prayer. And this, again, to teach us the importance to set aside time just for prayer, to commune with God. So today's gospel passage is just one example among many of how Jesus teaches us with insistence to pray and to set aside time for it every day. So on this occasion, after a busy day of preaching, healing, and performing miracles, before this Jesus worked the miracle of the multiplication of the loaves and fish for the 5,000, just before what we heard today, the episode in today's gospel passage. But after this, Jesus dismissed the crowds, and then, St. Matthew informs us, he went up on the mountain to pray. When it was evening, he was there alone. On the mountaintop, far from the crowds, alone, in silence and solitude, immersed in deep prayer. And this was customary, habitual for our Lord, our greatest teacher of prayer. In the world today, we're taught that there are many important things we can and should busy ourselves about, and prayer is not one of them. We're permitted, we're even encouraged, to pass all the time in the world with 1,001 various forms of entertainment and diversion, distraction, but not prayer. That would be a waste of time. We're exhorted to pursue productive and useful activities in life, and prayer is not considered to be such a one. In short, we live in a world that makes it difficult for us to pray, to reinforce that teaching within us, to become men and women of deep prayer who aren't content with saying a few prayers each day and that's it, though that is a good beginning, at least do that, but who want to be imbued with a spirit of prayer as the saints were, and we're called to be saints. Today, being the 13th day of the month, we also recall the apparitions of Our Lady of Fatima 100 years ago, still in the midst of the centennial, hopefully gaining many graces during this very special year. But as you will recall, the August apparition is the only one in which the apparition of Our Lady did not fall on the 13th, as was expected, but on the 19th of August, due to the opposition of the government officials who imprisoned the 3 shepherd children overnight. So some days after, Our Lady inspired the children to come to the Covent area and once again enjoy her visitation. On this occasion, Our Lady renewed her request to, of course, pray the rosary every day. And among other things, at the end of her visit, Sister Lucia tells us she looked very sad, and she said to the shepherd children, and she says to us as well, pray very much, and make sacrifices for sinners, for many souls go to hell, because there are none to sacrifice themselves and to pray for them. Today, let us renew our commitment to prayer, especially the prayer of the rosary each day. To pray it, not just to have it checked off our list of things to do, our duties, but to do it because we want to, because Our Lady asks us to do it. It's a prayer that's very powerful, and we can obtain many graces for us and for many others for the whole world by praying it. Pray it faithfully, pray it perseveringly, even when it does get difficult at times, and that is to be expected for all of us, but to persevere, and above all, pray it with love, simplicity, and devotion of a child, as it were, with a childlike spirit, which is so pleasing to our Lord and to Our Lady. And this will certainly, lead us to a very deep contemplative prayer life, as well as obtain many graces for others, for their conversion, for our loved ones, that they might return back to God, be saved and sanctified. Praise be Jesus and Mary.
misericordes